My guest this week on the Europe Conversation is Belgian Foreign Affairs Minister Maxime Prévot. He says his government's decision to recognise Palestine is not about legitimising Hamas, but about putting pressure on Israel for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the West Bank. Minister, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
With pleasure.
So the Coalition of the Willing have met in Paris again, and we know that their plans are quite far advanced in terms of the military situation in a post-conflict Ukraine. But key to that, of course, as we know, is US security guarantees. And what do we know about that so far? How concrete can they be?
That's a good question, and frankly speaking, when I was in Odessa last week, I discussed with my Ukrainian counterpart, and he explained to me and to my colleague coming from Luxembourg and the Netherlands, because it was a Benelux mission, that US and especially President Trump and Secretary Rubio made strong commitments related to this not only guarantee but really legally based backstop. So that's something which should be normally like an Article 5, let's say, way of thinking. Of course, till now, I didn't see any paper in order to identify whether or not it is enough strong in order to give to Ukraine certainties. But I think that it's important also that the US play an important role. But of course, Europe also have to take responsibility.
From the Trump perspective, how reliable can these security guarantees, this backstop, be when we know over the past few weeks in particular we've seen him change his mind over things like a ceasefire? And look, at the end of the day, it's not Article 5 because Ukraine is not in NATO.
Yeah, it's really the core aspect of the current negotiation. We need to draw the framework of potential US intervention, where, how, when, and it's true that when we discuss with Washington, there are several times change of way of thinking, let's say. So it will be really important to have strong commitments on paper in order to be sure that what US have mentioned will be correctly executed in the advantage of Ukraine, of course.
From a Belgian perspective, in the last few weeks, we've seen the European Commission really pushing for an updated scheme to take the 200 billion euros of frozen assets that Russia has in Europe, mainly, in particular in Belgium. And it's really sort of, the momentum has grown since the recent attack in Kyiv, particularly against the European Union's offices and so on. Is the Belgian position for moving on this?
Frankly speaking, and I clearly mentioned it once again in Copenhagen last week, confiscated those Russian sovereign assets is really not an option for Belgium. And maybe changing also the strategic investment of the current assets frozen in Brussels is also not an option for Belgium. Because when we analyzed the two options, we have many experts underlying the high risk, both legal, financial risk it can generate if we decide to confiscate. Of course, it will be a very bad signal to other countries worldwide. Some of them also have assets, sovereign assets, in Brussels or in other places in Europe. And so we consider that confiscated, those immobilized assets should trigger the financial places, should generate some disturbance and erode also the confidence, the trust in the euro. So it's really something that should create huge bad impact, systemic consequences for the credibility of the European financial places, according also to the European Central Bank. So it's why I express the fact that Belgium will not take this risk, and certainly not alone.
Belgium has announced, you have announced as Minister of Foreign Affairs in Belgium, that Belgium will eventually recognise Palestine. First of all, the reaction to that from the Israelis for other governments since October 7th is that you're rewarding terrorism, because the offshoot of October 7th is that several countries have decided to recognise Palestine. What's your response to that criticism by the Israeli government?
First, the context on the ground is really inhuman, especially in Gaza, when children, women, older people, and many citizens are starving. It's completely unacceptable. And I remind to the Israeli government that cutting off any humanitarian head is a war crime. And so, saying the fact that the Israeli government intend to launch new processes, not only for the total military occupation of Gaza, but also for the expansion of new illegal settlements, especially in West Bank. We would like to send to the Israeli government, of course, but also the world diplomatic world, a strong political signal. But in the same time, we will consider that the moment for Belgium for officially recognize the state of Palestine will come later, when two conditions will be met in order to avoid precisely to give the impression that we would like to reward Hamas. And so that's the release of all the hostages, and also the fact that Hamas is out of any governance of Palestine. That's two conditions for a formal and legal recognition of the state of Palestine for Belgium.
So let's look at what we heard from Kaya Kallas, the EU's foreign policy chief. She said that the US's unshakable support for Israel means that Europe is a little inhibited in what it can do. But in particular, when there has been some proposals, such as the most recent one from the European Commission to partially suspend Israeli access to Horizon, the main obstacle is Germany. Germany has refused all along to any sort of progress in sanctioning Israel for what the EU even regards as breaches of international law.
Of course, I respect the sovereignty of whole government to take decision, and I understand why Germany doesn't want to take sanction against Israel for historical reasons. We know that, but I've also seen that Germany has decided to, for instance, take strong commitments regarding the export of weapons to Israel. So the lines are moving, and maybe we will be able to achieve extra results. I think it is important also for the credibility of the European foreign policy. Frankly speaking, this credibility of the current foreign policy is collapsing. And it is not the fault of Kaya Kallas, let me be clear. I really underline his strong involvement for leading the foreign and security policy of Europe. But for many of our citizens, it's quite difficult to understand why, especially regarding the situation in Gaza. It is impossible for the EU to take strong decision. It's, they don't understand why we are not capable to take specific sanctions, seeing the different images we are looking when we open the television.
One of the other things that you're going to do is stop importing goods from illegal settlements in the West Bank. Slovenia has done this. Ireland is doing something similar. Norway has done something similar in relation to boycotting sort of settlements. But the backlash has been quite severe from the United States and Israel. Those countries have been threatened with sanctions, for example.
Of course, we have concerns, but frankly speaking, it's quite difficult to refuse to act according to our legal obligation. When we face the current situation in Gaza, only because of some fears related to economic aspects. Of course, we have the impression that the decision take is a courageous one, but also a needed one. And I hope that the US will not take, let's say, kind of sanction against the countries which decided to act like this in order to respect the international law, the humanitarian law, and trying to push pressure on Israel, not on the people of Israel, of course, because we also have, at Belgian level, taken some strong commitments in order to fight against any anti-Semitism, for instance. But it's really one of the measures taken in order to fight against the current far-right extremist government and the way this government is acting against the Palestinians.
Okay, Maxime Prévot, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Belgium, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
Thank you.